I know that you're starting the module on marine mammals, or the section on marine mammals. And so we're going to kind of focus on that, but I want to start and talk a little bit about sharks too, because that's what I did my research in. When I started working as a marine biologist, I worked at Walt Disney World's Living Seas Pavilion in Epcot Center. And so my official title was an aquarist because I worked in an aquarium with aquarium animals, which is a little bit different than working with animals in the wild, obviously. But it gives us a great opportunity to study creatures and know what parameters they need to be kept in captivity. For example, at the time that I was working, they had never been able to keep a white shark in captivity because, believe it or not, white sharks are really tender and delicate and cannot handle the stress of being in a captive environment. Since I was working, I think they have kept a couple of them for short periods of time for study, small ones, but they're still just so fragile. You would think that an organism like that would be fragile, but they get super stressed out, and sharks can easily get stressed. So that causes physical ailments, and then they don't live very long. So the aquarium itself is a 6 million gallon aquarium. You can go to Disney and see it today. It's a circular aquarium about 3 stories deep, and it's about 300 feet in diameter, so the size of a football field. It's really big. And it has about 100 different species of organisms that are found in the Caribbean. And so it's supposed to be a Caribbean reef, exactly what you would see if you were to dive out in the Caribbean, except for the fact that the coral is not alive, because the coral needs to feed on plankton, and to feed the coral, it would make the water too murky, and that's not very good for Disney. So one of the things that was interesting, and this was unique in an aquarium at the time, was we had dolphins, with bottlenose dolphins, which is like the picture you're seeing on the screen, if you can see that screen of the upper left one. And we also had sharks in the same aquarium. And the sharks were large ones. We had a tiger shark at the time, a bull shark, a couple of brown sharks, and lots of little nurse sharks. And so what was interesting was watching them interact. And people would say, oh, the poor dolphin, the sharks are going to eat them. And they were very concerned about that. Now, you guys have studied sharks already. And one of the things about sharks is they are, although they're fascinating creatures and very complex in their design, they're not the brightest bulbs in the ocean. Their brains are actually very small. I don't know if you guys have done the shark dissection, but if you did, the brain of the shark in comparison to the rest of its body is very tiny, with the exception of its olfactory lobes, which is the smelling lobes of the brain. They have much better developed smelling senses, so they have a larger brain capacity to identify those smells, but they're just not very intelligent. And so they react more than they do thinking when it comes to feeding. And so, like, when you see feeding frenzies, it's like Shark Week, most people are like, oh, it's Shark Week, let's watch all those videos of sharks eating things. Most of those feeding frenzies are not natural. Most of those things are induced by the producers of the show who want to see sharks eating stuff, and they want to see their teeth bared and everything. And so they chum the water and with blood and get the sharks all excited into their feeding mode, and the sharks just start sinking, and they just continue to eat and eat and eat, and makes this beautiful shot for the television. So what we found initially with the dolphin and the sharks in the same environment was the dolphins, who are very intelligent, they like to play. And of course, if you have a dog, you know dogs like to play. It's a sign of intelligence, play. And dolphins love to play. And so everything becomes a toy. Well, the dolphins would see the sharks, and they would say, giant toy. And they would corral the sharks down to the bottom of the aquarium, let go, and watch the sharks slowly float to the surface. Because remember, sharks don't have swim bladders like other fishes do. They can't control their buoyancy very well. And so they would float like this little wafting back up to the surface, and the dolphins would corral them back down, and they would gang up on them, of course. And the sharks didn't like that. That was stressing the sharks out. So we had to put the dolphins in timeout. Oftentimes it would be, the sharks would obviously be stressed because they would behave very differently after that bullying session with the dolphins. Dolphins just love to play. And so if you go to the aquarium, the Living Seas Aquarium today, you will notice that 1/4 of the aquarium is quadranted off. There's like a fence. It's wide enough for fishes to go back and forth, but the dolphins and the sharks cannot pass through. And that is, most people think that's to keep the dolphins safe, but it's not. That's to keep the sharks safe and the other animals safe, because the dolphins just love to play, and they don't have a morality of saying, this isn't right, shouldn't be doing this. They'll just play and play and play. So that was one of the unique situations that we had to deal with in the aquarium. And one of the things we wanted to know also was how the sharks interacted with each other, with different species of sharks and with the same species of shark. That was something we can't really do well in the wild. You know, you've got your shark tracking sharks that you've adopted, and you're checking how they go. That's great to see their swim patterns, but we don't see how they interact with each other. So some sharks we know will school, and some sharks we don't know if they school or if there's any kind of group behavior. Likely not a lot of group behavior, because again, that requires a semblance of intelligence, and they're not really smart. I did this is a little side issue, I did a necropsy on a bull shark. It was an 8-foot bull shark that had died. It washed up on shore, and we were trying to figure out what caused it to die. And while we were there, we decided, well, let's just take a look at what its brain looks like. And it took us a long time to find the brain, because it was so small in comparison to its body. So we wanted to know how they behaved. And so what I did research on was I studied shark behavior, where they were swimming, their swim patterns within the aquarium during certain times of day, during times when there were divers swimming in the aquarium, during times when the dolphins were let out and swimming around. And so we began to see if they had swim patterns. And those swim patterns adjusted depending on what we would call stresses in the aquarium. If there was particularly dolphin stress, if there were dolphins out, their swim patterns tended to change drastically, mostly far away from where the dolphin area was. But then we also had collected a new shark to add to the aquarium. It's another bull shark, and bull sharks are pretty aggressive sharks by nature. And so it was a great opportunity for us to see how the other bull shark behaved to the initial bull shark, or the new bull shark that was coming in, and the other sharks for this new bull shark addition. So we had an established pattern that we could pretty much predict a swim pattern around the aquarium that each of the sharks had established without stresses in the aquarium and with stresses. And then when we added the new shark, we were able to see how they related to each other, especially that other bull shark. And it turned out that the other bull shark really didn't identify, hey, you're my species, let's hang out. It was kind of like another big thing. I'm going to stay away from it. And so they basically considered that new bull shark another obstacle. And they adjusted their swim patterns and the time they were spending in different parts of the aquarium to accommodate that other large animal, who then established its swim pattern. So it was very interesting to see how that behaved. And of course, then once that new shark identified, hey, there's dolphins here, and these guys are crazy, it adjusted its swim pattern, so therefore the dolphins were out too. So they can learn. We've been able to see them learn, but it's mostly a reactionary learning, kind of a response to a stimulus, and they react. One thing we noticed, we would never hand feed the big sharks, the open ocean swimming sharks, because we didn't want them to associate divers with food, obviously. So we would feed them from the surface of the water with a long-handled pole that we would put a fish on, and they would eat the fish. The fish was a frozen fish that we thought, like a fresh frozen fish, and we would then put vitamins into that fish, and that's how they would get their nutrition. And just by slapping the surface of the water a couple times, they would come to that area, and that's how they would feed. So anyway, that was how we took care of them. But we also had nurse sharks, and nurse sharks are bottom-dwelling sharks. I kind of call them catfish with teeth. They're not very aggressive, and they are their teeth are very small. Their mouths are on the underside of their body, just like the rest of sharks, but even more so because they're bottom feeders. And so we would feed those guys by hand. Now, nurse sharks can get about 8 feet in length. And so, anyway, we would hand feed those guys, and it enabled us opportunity to kind of check them out as they would come up for food. We'd give them a fish. We'd rub our hands along their bodies, checking for deformities, injuries, parasites, and whatever. And eventually, one in particular, yay, nurse shark, someone just said, really enjoyed that tactile feeling. And so he would come up, he'd get his fish, he'd swim away, he'd come back up, we'd offer him the fish, and he wouldn't want the fish. He'd spit it back out. He wanted the belly rub. He would flip upside down. We'd give him a little belly rub. He loved that feeling. And so it really was kind of interesting that he learned to, that a diver meant, hey, I'm going to get a nice little belly rub. Yeah, like a big kitten, someone said. Because one of the things that do, this particular shark who loved it, not all of them did, but this one who loved it, ended up getting too big for the bottom-dwelling aquarium that we had him in. And so we had to release him in the wild. He got about 7 feet big in length. They can get a little bit bigger than that. And so we released him in the ocean. And, here's a funny thought. I just thought that it would be pretty funny one day if some unsuspecting diver in the Caribbean Ocean was swimming in this giant 7-foot shark comes up to him and flips upside down and wants belly rub. He would not know what's going on. But they can learn, but it's mostly due to response to a stimulus, not to thinking that we know that dolphins, that would be amazing. I don't know. It would kind of scare me too. But it's really interesting how we've learned about how they behave. Their behavior is more stimulus and reaction than versus thinking processes. So that's my story about sharks and studying them. And they're fascinating creatures. And even though they're considered very simple on the evolutionary tree, according to evolutionists, when you look at their physical body and the organs that they have, like their ampullae of Lorenzini, those tiny pits that help them identify magnetic fields, those are required for them to survive, to catch the food that they need. And they cannot survive without them working properly. Whenever you see a complex organ in an organism, complexity shows on the evolutionary tree longer development time, more recent appearing on the evolutionary tree. So that's difficult for evolutionists to explain how these guys came to be, how they evolved, because they're supposed to be simple, and the more we're studying, the more we're finding that they're not simple. And so it just totally causes a ton of red flags. There's a question, is it hard for sharks to adapt into the ocean from the aquarium? Not as much as you would think, because they're reactionary organisms. They still have their hunting instincts. They would probably do very well without much transition into the ocean. The only transition would need to be temperature, water quality, salinity, that kind of stuff. So you would probably have them from a captive aquarium to an aquarium that is connected to ocean water that you slowly cycle in ocean water, ocean temperatures, ocean salinities, and then slowly release them in the ocean so that they can handle those physical parameters. Mentally, they're fine. Now, with marine mammals, very different. Marine mammals are very, very intelligent, and you can kind of imagine them like a dog. If you had a dog as a pet, and it was your pet for years, and then you couldn't keep him anymore, and someone else had to adopt him. So now he's living in a completely new environment. He has total confusion as to where he is, when to go outside, who's this person, and so they're more social animals, and so it would be a big transition. Same thing with marine mammals, which I believe are slightly more intelligent than dogs. They still have that social, mental understanding of what their surroundings are. And so once a cetacean is in captivity, it's much more difficult, if not impossible, to release them. Now, if there's been an injured one that's been in captivity for short periods of time, then you can release them much more easily, and we've found that they will survive better. But they are, one that's born in captivity, only knows captivity, it would be very detrimental to put them out in the ocean. Questions are flying. I'm trying to stay up with this. Um, Watch the video on orcas flipping sharks. What is that all about? Orcas are cetaceans, right? Orcas love to play, and they play with their food. It's gruesome to watch, but dolphins will do the same thing. They are intelligent. They love to play with any kind of toy. In fact, we used to have lots of toys for our dolphins to keep them engaged. And I remember one time, dolphin was playing with one of the beach balls we had was floating on the surface, and they had separate places they could go away from the aquarium to free to go in and out, but they can go separate, but no other organisms can go in to be by themselves and have their own place. And that's where we kept a lot of their toys. And he popped his beach ball, and we didn't have any more to give him. And he pouted in the corner for a good day and a half. Behaved very much like a 3-year-old who broke his bike and wanted his bike. Very much like that. So they, because they're intelligent, they love to play. But don't let intelligence make you think they're like us. Again, they don't have a moral compass. They don't have souls. They don't know what's right and wrong. You know, that orca is but they are one that's born in captivity, only knows captivity. It would